Picture a time of great empires, vast territories, and a simmering pot of nationalistic fervor. This was the world before the First World War. The globe was dominated by a handful of mighty powers: the British Empire, with its sun never setting; the German Empire, a rising industrial titan; the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of diverse cultures and languages; the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe struggling to maintain its hold; and the Russian Empire, vast and mysterious, straddling both Europe and Asia. These empires were entangled in a complex web of alliances and rivalries, a precarious dance of power that kept the world in a delicate balance. Every move, every decision was a calculated step in this high-stakes game of chess, yet beneath the surface, tensions were brewing, ready to boil over. The stage was set for a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. In the heart of Europe, a single gunshot would ignite the powder keg. It was June 28, 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife were assassinated in Sarajevo by a young Serbian nationalist. This tragic event was the spark that ignited the deadliest conflict the world had yet seen. The intricate web of alliances, treaties, and diplomatic obligations that were meant to maintain peace instead set off a domino effect of war declarations. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, declared war on Serbia, pulling Russia into the fray to defend its Slavic brethren. The gears of war began to turn, bringing in France and Britain due to their alliances with Russia. The assassination of a single man had set off a chain reaction that would engulf the entire world. It was a time of tension, uncertainty, and ultimately war. With the world's powers drawn into the fray, the Great War had begun. On the Western Front, the war quickly descended into a bloody stalemate. The Great War, as it was known then, was characterized by a grim and grueling form of combat, trench warfare. Soldiers on both sides dug into the earth, creating extensive networks of trenches that stretched across the Western Front from the English Channel to the Swiss frontier. In this labyrinth of mud and despair, the opposing forces faced off against one another, often separated by a mere no-man's land, a stretch of bomb-blasted earth lined with barbed wire. Life in the trenches was a surreal nightmare of constant artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and the ever-present threat of a deadly gas attack. Two battles in particular epitomized the brutality and futility of trench warfare: the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun. The Battle of the Somme, which took place in the summer of 1916, is remembered as one of the bloodiest battles in human history. On the first day alone, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties. Over the course of the battle, more than 1 million men on both sides were killed or wounded, all for a territorial gain of just 7 miles. The Battle of Verdun, fought from February to December 1916, was equally devastating. The French and German armies clashed for nearly 10 months over a small patch of land, resulting in over 700,000 casualties. Verdun became a symbol of French resistance and a testament to the human capacity for endurance in the face of unimaginable hardship. Yet for all the blood spilled and lives lost, the Western Front remained a deadlock. The intricate network of trenches, the lethal no-man's land, and the relentless artillery barrages made significant advances nearly impossible. Soldiers lived and died in the mud, and the once green and peaceful landscapes of France and Belgium were transformed into a desolate wasteland. Despite the high human cost, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Western Front, a symbol of the futile and bloody nature of the First World War, remained a stalemate until the final days of the conflict. While the Western Front was locked in stalemate, the Eastern Front was a theater of maneuver and movement. Unlike the Western Front's trench warfare, the Eastern Front was marked by vast landscapes and fluid lines, with armies clashing across a broad swathe of territory. The Russian Empire, with its sheer size and population, posed a formidable opponent. Yet it was plagued by internal issues, lack of preparation, and strategic miscalculations. The Battle of Tannenberg in late August of 1914 was a significant event. The German forces, under the command of Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, encircled and destroyed an entire Russian army, resulting in a devastating loss for Russia. Yet, despite this setback, the Russian forces continued to put pressure on the Central Powers, diverting much-needed resources from the Western Front. Meanwhile, other theaters of the war began to unfold. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, aligned with the Central Powers, faced off against British and colonial forces. The Gallipoli campaign was a notable event, with Allied forces attempting to seize control of the Dardanelles Strait. Despite months of intense fighting, the campaign ended in failure for the Allies. In Africa, British and French colonies clashed with German colonies in a series of sporadic and often overlooked skirmishes. The Battle of Tanga, often referred to as the Battle of Bees, saw a poorly executed British attack repelled by a significantly smaller German force, demonstrating the challenges of warfare in the harsh African environment. In the skies, the advent of aviation brought a new dimension to warfare. Aircraft were initially used for reconnaissance, but as technology advanced, they became instruments of combat, engaging in dogfights and bombing runs. The war was truly global in scope, with battles raging on land, sea, and for the first time in the air. In 1917, the war's balance of power shifted dramatically with the entry of a new player, the United States. Initially, America adopted a policy of isolation, preferring to watch the flames of war from across the Atlantic. But several factors led to a change of heart. The unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany and the infamous Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico, were the final straws that broke the camel's back. America could no longer sit idle. It was time to join the fight. The entry of the United States brought a surge of fresh troops and a wealth of resources to the Allies' aid. The infusion of American enthusiasm, manpower, and material tipped the scale in favor of the Allies. It was this injection of fresh blood and steel that breathed new life into the beleaguered Allied forces. With fresh troops and resources, the Allies now had the upper hand. After 4 long years of bloodshed and suffering, the end was in sight. In the early months of 1918, the German Spring Offensive would kickstart the final chapter of the Great War. Germany, bolstered by troops freed up from the Eastern Front, launched a series of attacks on the Western Front, hoping to break the deadlock before American forces could fully mobilize. These attacks, while initially successful, were unable to deliver a decisive victory. Instead, they left the German forces exhausted and stretched thin. As the spring turned to summer, the Allied forces, now reinforced by fresh American troops, began their counterattack. This series of engagements, known as the 100 Days Offensive, would prove to be the turning point of the war. The Allies pushed back the German lines, retaking lost ground and gaining new territories. The German forces, worn out and with no fresh troops to call upon, could not hold off the onslaught. In the face of mounting losses and dwindling resources, the German High Command had to face the inevitable. The war was lost. In early November, a German delegation met with Allied commanders in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France. There, they signed the armistice, an agreement to end all hostilities. It's remarkable to consider that the fate of millions was decided in a humble railway carriage. However, the armistice was merely a ceasefire, a pause in hostilities, not a formal end to the war. That would come later with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in the summer of 1919. But for the soldiers in the trenches, for the families waiting anxiously at home, the armistice meant the end of the fighting, the end of the bloodshed. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent. The Great War, the war to end all wars, was over. But the world would never be the same again. The war was over, but its impact would be felt for generations. In the wake of the Great War, the world was forever changed. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the Hall of Mirrors, brought an official end to the hostilities. This treaty, however, was not the symbol of peace and unity that many had hoped for, but rather a punitive document that left Germany disgruntled, indebted, and ripe for future conflict. But the Treaty of Versailles was just one part of the aftermath. Borders across Europe were redrawn, with new nations emerging from the ashes of empires. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia were born, while the map of the Middle East was reshaped, leading to a century of turmoil that continues to this day. The loss of life was staggering. More than 9 million soldiers were killed and countless others were wounded, both physically and mentally. The influenza pandemic that swept across the globe in the final year of the war added to the death toll, claiming more lives than the war itself. Societal changes were equally profound. The war accelerated technological advancements from tanks to airplanes that would redefine warfare in the 20th century. It also sparked a wave of social change. Women who had taken on roles traditionally held by men during the war began to demand greater rights and opportunities. In many countries, this led to women finally gaining the right to vote. The war also left a deep psychological scar on the world. The idea of a lost generation emerged as an entire cohort of young men were wiped out or forever changed by their experiences on the battlefield. The disillusionment and cynicism that followed would come to characterize much of the literature and art of the post-war era. The First World War, a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation, left a lasting imprint on the world. From the political and geographical changes to the loss of life and societal shifts, the echoes of the war can still be heard today. The First World War changed the world in ways that are still felt today. So, what have we learned from this journey back to the early 20th century? We dove into the origins of the First World War, understanding that a complex web of political alliances, territorial ambitions, and nationalistic fervor set the stage for a conflict on a scale never before seen. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, a spark in the powder keg of European tensions, ignited the war that would engulf the world. We traversed the Western Front, where the horror of trench warfare became the grim reality for millions. The Battle of the Somme, Verdun, and Ypres. These names echo through history as symbols of the brutal and relentless nature of this war. We ventured to the Eastern Front and beyond, where the vast expanses of the Russian and Ottoman empires became battlegrounds, further stretching resources and exacerbating the human cost. We saw America's entry into the war, an event that tipped the scales in favor of the Allies. The infusion of fresh troops and resources marked the beginning of the end for the Central Powers. We witnessed the end of the war, a moment marked by the signing of the armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. But the end of fighting did not mean the end of suffering. In the aftermath, we observed a world forever changed. Empires crumbled, new nations emerged, and the seeds of future conflicts were sown in the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The war claimed the lives of over 17 million people, a haunting testament to the devastating power of modern warfare. The First World War was a cataclysmic event that shaped the course of the 20th century. It was a testament to the devastating power of modern warfare and a chilling reminder of the cost of global conflict.